What's up, Rovers? For those of you that clicked on this video, know that this is a follow-up to the complete Roccia guide I uploaded last week. I'm sorry this video has been delayed. I've been busy IRL touching grass. Luckily no injuries to report, but I've been very tired, so it took a bit. This is a full team building guide for Roccia with all team variants, gearing, and rotations. Due to its depth and length, I've chosen to split it off from its own video. If you're interested in a full breakdown on everything Roccia, please check out my previous video at the top right. I don't list when to cast magic boxes radial suck because, well, you can decide that for yourself. It is assumed all Shorekeepers and Verina shown today will be using variation, and if you don't have this, well, expect to perform several extra basic attacks to fill their concerto bar fully. Biter and other healers can be subbed in as needed with similar rotations. Roccia fills the sub DPS role in most teams, offering Havoc and basic damage amplify, which is a final multiplier. Therefore, her best teams will always aim to take advantage of those traits, combined with Roccia's other benefits. While Camellya appears to be the best fit, Roccia also works with Havoc Rover, Danjin, and Encore. She can even be used as main DPS herself, or, well, buffing Zhezhi carry, but these are less advised. For all of these characters except Camellya, they lack true AoE hitboxes, but have access to cleave tools that can hit everything in front of them. This is perfect for Roccia's Skill Tornado and Inherent Skill Magic Box utility item, both of which grant large-scale grouping on demand. Now if you can't do AoE, you might as well bring the enemies to you, right? While Roccia needs to compete against Sanhua for Camellya teams due to Camellya being 70 to 75% basic damage, none of the other Havoc DPS deal that much basic damage on their pie charts. This means Roccia is a much stronger buffer versus Sanhua for raw damage in the case of Havoc Rover, or Danjin. Expect to see Rover ults well over 200k and Danjin heavies getting close to 80k. In the case of Encore, Roccia brings much needed grouping for Encore's Liberation Cleave moveset, losing some damage in exchange for being able to kill entire crowns. But Sanhua still rotates much faster by default for higher DPS and Encore teams. Thus, the goal of today's teams is to reduce Roccia's dedicated field time as much as possible so that her stronger buffs and grouping tools can shine, allowing the main DPS to focus on, well, their DPS with no cost to overall team scaling on slower rotations. Most teams can benefit from an extra Roccia skill cast for 100 Forte, or one full segment and bonus Concerto on top of her usual rotation, since it only has a 10 seconds cooldown, and team rotations for Roccia all revolve around the 25 seconds benchmark, except Danjin. This can speed up her own rotations by reducing Real Fantasy's bounces needed to outro, while also lowering her ER requirements. I also prefer to front-load Roccia's Liberation since the attack flat buff lasts for a full 30 seconds, which is longer than a full team rotation. It also allows you to buff her bounces in the first team rotation as well. All showcase footage today will be done with Moonlit Clouds on Roccia, because it is more future-proof, and I also don't have a Midnight Veil set farmed. If you are using Midnight Veil, the Nightmare Heron can be used during a Quickswap or at the end of a rotation before you outro. For a full explanation on the Midnight Veil vs Moonlit Cloud situation, refer to my original Roccia character guide at the top right. It is assumed Roccia will always have at least 120 ER, with extra depending on teammate choice and whether or not you let her intro in that particular team. This will be explained further in each team section. Every team in rotation today was designed with highest priority on maximizing team DPS. Therefore, rotations may be complex and can be slowed down or certain swaps skip someone at your discretion, but note that this will result in DPS loss. As a reminder, Shorekeeper will always be better than Verina and Roccia teams, as Roccia herself does not need her intro to begin with, which means your TPS can double intro even on a Shorekeeper setup, something traditionally only possible on Verina teams. Biter and other healers can be subbed in as needed with similar rotations, but will always perform worse. We'll be starting off with Hypercarry setups with non-swap and Quickswap variants. This will include the most popular and expected Havoc DPS units. Later onwards, we'll reach the alternative setups such as Encore DPS or Zhezhi or even Roccia DPS, with increasingly complicated rotations and requirements. In other words, this video will go from the easiest and most relevant Roccia teams to hardest. Hopefully you'll find some team comps and rotations interesting to pick up. Let's go. The main team people think of for Roccia is Camellya Roccia. It makes sense since this is the Havoc team with the highest DPS and best AoE coverage with a straightforward rotation. The problem comes down to Camellya occupying huge amounts of field time, whereas Sanhua normally balances this with super fast rotations. We also have the double intro Camellya setup that allows you to line up Sanhua's buffs better. This means we have to find a way to cut down Roccia's dedicated field time as much as possible. Luckily for us, Roccia is also able to work in double intro Camellya teams, and in fact, unlike Sanhua, Roccia doesn't need her intro at all in Quickswap teams. teams with 0 drawbacks, allowing even Shorekeeper teams to flow super fast at max DPS. Unfortunately, this is locked behind Quickswap, but this contrasts Sanhua slowing down, or needing to run Overture even at S5 if you completely give up her intro in Shorekeeper teams. This also means the Roccia Camellya team will perform much better with Shorekeeper than Verina, whereas for Sanhua Camellya, they have similar performance. You can cycle your healer into Roccia into Camellya like a normal non-swap setup, but I won't be showing that today for Camellya teams. This is because not quick swapping Roccia and Camellya teams loses most of her appeal, making her equal, if not worse, than Sanhua. Thus, we'll focus on how to optimize the Roccia Camellya quick swap rotation. Trust, it's not that difficult, and uses the same quick swap windows as other standard Camellya Sanhua teams. First, we'll look at the Shorekeeper rotation, then the Verina variant. Both healers should be on 5-piece healer set, with Shorekeeper reaching 250 ER in combat. Remember, Fallacy in her inherent skill can give her up to plus 20% ER. Verina will want to at least 250 ER, 260 if you can reach it. Roccia will want to be 135 ER in the Shorekeeper team variant because we will not be giving her any intro, where she wants 125 to 130 ER on the Verina team variant because we will give her an intro. I recommend Moonlit set, but it can still work with Midnight Veil. Camellya should be on 5-piece old or new Havoc set at 115 ER if you're using Dreamless, Nightmare Crownless, or Lorelei, and 125 ER if you're using Old Crownless. Rotation time? We open into Shorekeeper's long basic 3, swap to Roccia because the animation takes too long, basic 2 and skill to do an early tornado for Concerto and Forte and instantly swap off. Camellya can cast new Crownless or Lorelei here if you're using them. Swap back to Shorekeeper doesn't matter if you're too slow, and in the air. She should be 4 out of 5 Forte segments, attack once in heavy, cancelling with Liberation, then basic 1, 2, 3 again. Skill cancel the moment the orb appears, echo the buff, then basic plus heavy again into outro. We go directly into Camellya to start burning her Forte for buff stacks. Slam down on pre-hold heavy. Back swap this with Roccia's basic 2, 3, and Heron cast if you're using it. It doesn't matter if you're a bit slow to swap back an N in the air since Camellya is already in the air. Continue to spin until her sword glows red and is about to slam down. Swap back to Roccia, slam down and cast Liberation to buff the team, skill Tornado and dodge cancel the moment it appears if grouping isn't needed, then bounce twice and outro back onto Camellya again. At this point you have several options. What you will want to do is slam down if you're using Crownless or the Nightmare variant so you can cast from the ground. Then dodge cancel into Liberation plus skill. Otherwise you can immediately skill into Liberation, cast Ephemeral, do your full big spin, and skill cast at the end to dismount. Cast Dreamless or Nightmare Crownless if you're using it, and outro into Shorekeeper's enhanced intro. Shorekeeper will do basic 1, 2, 3 again, and swap cancel to Roccia again to perform basic 2 plus skill. Squeeze in Camellya Nightmare Crownless or Lorelei if you're using it, before swapping back to Shorekeeper to get her last Forte segment with basic 1. Heavy into Liberation cancel, then skill plus echo spamming basics until you can outro. You'll directly intro Camellya here like the first rotation, slamming down and setting up the heavy, so you can back swap Roccia's 2-3 plus Heron, then go back into Camellya's spin, and then when about to slam, swap back to Roccia's slam down plus Liberation. Skill plus bounce to continue the rotation, and outro into Camellya to DPS. Rinse and repeat until the enemy dies. The Verina version of this team is very similar, with less quick swap windows since Verina has less moves. In exchange, we directly intro Roccia when Camellya is done, allowing the team to still flow smoothly. Roccia opens again with basic 1-2 plus skill, and swap. Camellya can squeeze in new Crownless or Lorelei using them here, otherwise swap to Verina to basic 3-4-5, Liberation, and skill plus echo followed by Aerial 2, so you can outro into Camellya early to start burning her Forte stacks. She slams down on pre-holds heavy, letting you back swap to Roccia and fit in basic 2-3 plus Heron before going back to Camellya's spin. When she's about to slam and the sword glows red, swap to Roccia to slam down and cast Liberation. Skill and dodge cancel if the grouping isn't needed and bounce twice to outro into Camellya again. If using Crownless or Nightmare variants, slam down and cast it. Dodge into Liberation cancel, then skill and Ephemeral into your main DPS spin. Remember to skill to dismount and cast Dreamless before outro if you're using it. We intro directly back into Roccia, substituting for the basic 2 we normally do on the Shorekeeper team. Then swap to Camellya and cast new Crownless or Lorelei if using them, and then swap to Verina basic 3-4-5 to reset the team rotation. Your Liberation once again, skill plus echo and Aerial times 2 into Camellya so she can start burning her Forte again. Keep squeezing in Roccia back swaps during the heavy attack, and then again when Camellya slams, and you'll remove most of Roccia's dedicated field time, so you can benefit the most from her buffs. Repeat until you clear the fight. The next team is arguably a better fit for Roccia, Havoc Rover. This is because Rover lacks AoE whatsoever like Camellya, so Roccia's grouping is much more appreciated. Additionally, Havoc Rover's main DPS only deals 30% basic damage overall, making Sanhua's buff a lot less beneficial versus Camellya's 70 to 75% basic damage distribution. You might be thinking, but what about Danjin's sub DPS? Now, while this works and provides slightly better Havoc buffs versus Roccia, Rover still actually deals basic damage, and thus their buff effects are pretty much equal. Additionally, Danjin's sub DPS rotation is a lot more complicated if you want to rotate as fast as possible. Roccia both brings more useful buffs to the team and is easier to use than Danjin as the sub DPS role with similar DPS output. Of course, consider that Sanhua and Danjin are 4-star, and thus likely won't cost you any extra pulls to have available for team building, unlike Roccia. Finally, because Rover's rotations are a lot faster than Camellya, you're not forced to play Quickswap in this kind of team to cut down on rotation times, making Rover Roccia actually easier to play with multiple options. I will include both the easy and hard versions of each Rover team rotation in the following section. The Shorekeeper team is notable for Rover because Roccia doesn't need our intro. This allows you to still double intro Havoc Rover if you play Quickswap, to have immediate access to a full forte bar without needing to find a way to cast an extra Rover skill somewhere, something normally only accessible to the Verina team. Both healers should be on 5-piece healer set, with Shorekeeper reaching 250 ER in combat, and remember Fallacy in her enhanced skill can give her up to plus 20% ER. Verina will want to be 250 ER, 260 if you can reach it. Roccia only needs 120 ER in the easy Shorekeeper rotation since she gets her intro, but she'll want 125 to 130 ER on both Verina easy and hard variants, and 130 to 135 ER on the hard Shorekeeper rotation, where she doesn't get her intro at all. I recommend Moonlit set, but it can still work with Midnight Veil. Havoc Rover should be an old Havoc set with Dreamless at 110 to 115 ER. Let's start off with the easier way to play the Shorekeeper team first. The only swap you have here is front-loading Roccia's Liberation in the first rotation after Shorekeeper's basic 1, 2, 3. Then we do the standard extra Liberation plus skill, plus Dreamless on the Havoc Rover opener, since all of this stuff should be off cooldown by the time we need to use Rover's actual rotation. Go back to Shorekeeper to finish her rotation, basic 1 plus heavy with Liberation cancel, and then basic 1, 2, 3 with skill and echo cancel, then another basic 1 plus heavy so she can outro onto Roccia. Basic 4 and immediately skill into her bounces. You can dodge cancel to Tornado early if you don't need the grouping. Then outro into Rover to do her whole DPS rotation. Slam into skill, then heavy for Dark Surge, immediately cancel Life Taker. Then run 2 full rotations of basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 2 extra basic pokes, and then remember to cast ult right before Dark Surge expires so it still benefits from the Havoc percent buff. Dreamless and outro back into Shorekeeper enhanced intro. For the next rotation, interrupt Shorekeeper's basic 1, 2, 3 plus skill with a Rover skill cast swap to help her forte bar. Continue Shorekeeper's moveset, basic 1 plus heavy plus echo cancel. Then spam basic until you can outro into Roccia. She leads into basic 4, then Liberation, cancel the hit. Skill and dodge cancel if needed into 3 bounces, into outro, into Rover again. Skill again, and immediately heavy to enter Dark Surge state, and then cast Life Taker and continue the rotation like before until outro onto Shorekeeper to reset the rotation again. The harder version of this team focuses on trying to fit Roccia's entire rotation inside of Shorekeeper's and Rover's rotations, to cut team rotations down to below 25 seconds, thus limiting ourselves only to Shorekeeper's ult timer. We open with Roccia's basic 1, 2 plus skill, cancel this immediately with Liberation, and basic 1, 2 again. Canceling will swap into Havoc Rover Liberation, then skill into Dreamless. Finally, go to Shorekeeper's basic 1, 2, 3 plus Liberation cancel the long animation, then basic 1 plus heavy and swap back to Roccia to do basic 2, 3 plus Heron or whatever echo and swap back to Shorekeeper. Basic 1, 2, 3 plus skill cancel again, then echo, then basic 1 plus heavy to fill the rest of your concerto and outro onto Roccia. If you landed every single hit, a simple skill cast will let you instantly outro Roccia onto Rover, otherwise you may need 1 bounce. Rover slams down, skills into heavy Dark Surge state, cast Life Taker immediately and do full basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 2 cycles, then poke 2 more times before casting Liberation with Dark Surge is still active, and Dreamless into outro Shorekeeper reset. For the following rotations, we cancel Shorekeeper's basic 1, 2, 3 with Roccia basic 2, 3, 4 plus Liberation cancel. Skill and instantly swap back to Shorekeeper to basic 1 plus Freehold heavy into Liberation cancel. Then skill and instantly swap back to Roccia before she falls. Real Fantasy bounce 1, 2, then swap back to Shorekeeper to dive bomb Echo and outro into Rover. Instantly swap back to Roccia and finish your third bounce, and Echo if needed to outro again back into Rover. Slam plus skill and heavy into Dark Surge immediately, then cast Life Taker skill and 2 full chains of basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, poke twice, and then Liberation plus Streamless into Shorekeeper to reset. This is probably my favorite Rover team to play to date. If you're instead using Verina, both the easy and hard rotations will double intro Rover for easy full forte, and Rover will still outro into Roccia so she gets her own intro. The easy version opens with Roccia Liberation for attack buffs. Then Rover instantly casts Liberation plus skill plus Dreamless, since all will be off cooldown later. Swap to Verina for basic 345, Liberation, and then skill plus Echo, then aerial times 2 to outro onto Roccia. Continue into basic 4, then skill plus 3 times bounce to outro onto Rover. You slam down, cast your normal skill, then heavy to enter Dark Surge state, and instantly cast Life Taker skill. Do your standard 2 times basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, poke 2 extra times, then Liberation plus Dreamless to outro into Roccia for Forte and Concerto. She skips the basic 4 and resets Liberation buff before swapping to Verina basic 3, 4, 5. Liberation with skill and Echo, and then aerial times 2 outro into Rover to slam down. Swap to Roccia, skill into the air and dodge cancel Tornado if grouping not needed, bounce 3 times and Echo to outro back onto Rover again. Forte should be full, cast skill and heavy to enter Dark Surge, then Life Taker skill and continue to DPS like before to outro into Roccia once again. Very straightforward, just double introing Rover for no extra skill casts. Now the hard version serves the same purpose as the Shorekeeper variant. You speed up the team by putting Roccia rotations partially inside Rover and Verina's moveset to push rotations below 25 seconds. The opening rotation is literally identical and only changes from the second rotation onwards. We will still set up Roccia's Liberation first before going to Havoc Rover to cast a throwaway ult plus skill and Dreamless. Swap to Verina basic 345 to Liberation cancel, and then skill plus Echo and aerial times 2 cancel. Outro into Roccia to do basic 4, and then skill with full 3 times bounce before outroing onto Havoc Rover. She performs her full DPS rotation, skill plus heavy Dark Surge state, and immediately Life Taker before basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 twice. Poke 2 times more, then Liberation plus Dreamless before resetting onto Roccia. You will basic 4 and Liberation cancel and cast the Tornado skill. Quickly swap off to Verina basic 345, then go back to Roccia Real Fantasy 1, 2, 3. Swap off before the third bounce connects to slam down with Havoc Rover. Instantly swap to Verina for Liberation plus skill plus Echo plus aerial times 2 and outro onto Havoc Rover. Immediately swap to Roccia and poke the enemy and Echo outro onto Havoc Rover again. Skill into heavy Dark Surge, then Life Taker, and then basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 twice, like before. Poke twice more, Liberation into Dreamless, and outro into Roccia again. Rinse and repeat. Next up are the Encore teams. Roccia is not a DPS increase for Encore, in fact, you lose damage. However, Roccia brings grouping to the table, and since Encore's biggest weakness is lack of AoE, she's literally perfect fit, and I really mean it, for AoE content. She's still by far strongest 5-star standard and competes with the best limited carries when played well. Therefore, giving up some DPS to gain access to grouping is still worth it if you need Encore to clear horde waves, like Pincer. Or if you want to play the new Powerpuff Girls team, that actually works well this time. Because Encore is obviously not Havoc, Roccia's only brings a 200 attack flat buff and 25% basic amplifier to the table for DPS. Sanhua brings a 20% attack buff at S6 and a 38% basic amplifier on outro instead, which is a fair bit more damage. If you're bossing, I would still recommend using Sanhua instead of Roccia with Encore. For optimal team building, Roccia should be with Camellya or Rover, and Sanhua would be the one paired with Encore. Otherwise, note that Roccia Encore teams are also slightly slower than Sanhua Encore teams. Roccia Encore is only competitive when used as Quickswap. All Encore teams used today include 2 normal skill casts per rotation outside of the ult, meaning she only needs 100 to 105 ER to be able to maintain her Liberation. If you're unable to fit in a second normal skill, I would recommend 110 to 115 ER on Encore with Molten Rift set. The lower bound, like 100 ER, is represented by using the OG Inferno Rider that hits 3 times and produces more energy, whereas the higher bound, like 105 ER, is represented by using the new, faster Nightmare Inferno Rider that only hits once and thus produces less energy but allows the team to rotate faster. This team produces a ton of energy overall, so Roccia, regardless of Moonlit or Midnight Veil, only needs 110 to 120 ER, depending on whether or not you fit Encore's second normal skill in. Verina will want 250 ER on this team, alongside Shorekeeper with 250 in combat, both on 5-piece healer set. Both Encore openers include a difficult back swap cancel that is entirely optional. If you cannot swap back in time to land Encore's skill and big hit, don't worry, it's not a big DPS loss over the course of the fight. This is done by interrupting Shorekeeper's basic 1-2-3 with Encore's initial skill cast and being instantly back swapped to Roccia ult plus Echo. You want to do this as fast as physically possible, as there's barely enough time to swap back to Encore for the final hit. Otherwise, swap directly to Shorekeeper, basic 1 plus heavy with Liberation cancel, continue basic 1-2-3 again and cancel with skill plus Echo. Basic plus heavy once more time before outro onto Roccia. Use basic 4 and swap off as soon as you cast your skill, use Encore's Inferno Rider Echo, then swap back to Roccia to bounce twice, before back swapping Encore's skill cast again. Finish Roccia's third bounce and instantly outro onto Encore. Cast Liberation and then do your DPS rotation of basic 1, 2, 3, 4, alternating interrupting the final hit once the puppet spawns with either a Liberation skill or otherwise dodge cancel. Remember to Forte Heavy before outroing back onto Shorekeeper's enhanced hit to restart the rotation. Interrupt her basic 3 with Encore normal skill before casting Roccia Liberation for attack buff plus Echo, before finishing Shorekeeper's rotation with basic 1 plus heavy with Liberation cancel. Skill plus Echo and spam basics until you can outro back onto Roccia. Lead into basic 4 and swap off the instant you cast Tornado skill. Set up Encore's Inferno Rider again before going back to bounce 2 times on Roccia, then cast Encore's skill and commit to Roccia's third bounce. Outro onto Encore and immediately go into Liberation to DPS phase again, before resetting into Shorekeeper once more. Now, if you're instead using Verina, this team only needs minor corrections. We open directly on Encore, and rotations end by introing back onto Roccia instead of Verina. Encore's initial skill cast should be instantly swapped to Roccia Liberation to frontload the attack buff plus Echo. If you are able to swap back to Encore in time to skill end, do it, else skip directly to Verina basic 3-4-5, Liberation plus skill and Echo, and then Aerial times 2 so you can outro onto Roccia. Do the basic 4 hit and skill Tornado before swapping to Encore for Inferno Rider cast. Nightmare works too. Swap back to Roccia to bounce twice, and then back to Encore to cast normal skill again, and then final Roccia bounce to outro into Encore. Immediately cast Liberation and do her standard rotation with basic 1, 2, 3, 4 plus skill or dodge cancel for 3 cycles. Then Forte Heavy before outroing back onto Roccia. You Liberation to reset the attack buff and Echo before swapping back to Encore to cast the extra skill. Then go to Verina basic 3-4-5 to reset her buffs with Liberation, skill plus Echo, and Aerial times 2. Outroing back onto Roccia. Basic 4 plus skill, and then go back to alternating bounces with Encore Inferno Rider cast, next skill cast. And then after the third bounce, outro onto Encore to immediately go into Liberation again. After TPS phase, we reset the team back to Roccia. The Danjin teams can be a bit confusing. These are also tentative Danjin rotations, as I only just finally finished building and learning her. Feel free to play around with the rotations if you come up with something better. There is the typical healer to sub DPS the main DPS rotation, but we'll also be throwing in pre-charging Forte segments for Danjin every time. Your goal is to have Danjin's full Forte bar stacked and debuff mark applied on the enemy by the time you intro her with full buffs active, so you can immediately ult and full Forte heavy. Then you rush the filler Forte a second time, heavy again before buffs expire, and outro to reset the team. So when you fill Danjin's bar the first time to pre-charge in a rotation, during your healer's rotation, of course. As a result, rotations are quite long in this kind of team, but damage is as high as how fast you can make Danjin's insane DPS go. Verina will want 220 ER alongside Shorekeeper with 250 in combat, both on 5-piece healer set. Roccia only needs 100 ER on Moonlit set or Midnight Veil. Danjin is pretty good energy producer, which is why ER requirements are a bit lower overall. Danjin herself will only need 100 ER as a main DPS in a full team. As Danjin doesn't have massive damage spikes, your goal is to rotate as fast as possible so she can deal her consistent damage while being buffed. For the Shorekeeper variant, we open with her basic 1-2-3 before immediately ulting on Roccia plus skill for early Concerto and Forte and getting that attack buff up immediately. Danjin then applies Incinerating Will for the basic skill times 2 combo, and then one full skill basic 2-3 plus skill times 3 to fill most, but not all of Concerto and Forte bar, before swapping back to Shorekeeper to finish your setup. That's the thing, no matter what you do, dodge counters or whatever in this opener, just make sure you swap back to Shorekeeper without outroing. Basic 1 plus heavy with Liberation cancel, then basic 1-2-3 again with skill plus echo cancel, and then another basic 1 plus heavy, outroing into Danjin. Skill times 2 to reapply the debuff mark and outro onto Roccia. She will immediately skill and bounce 3 times before hair and outro back into Danjin. You can squeeze in an echo cast right before she ults here, or earlier when you were doing the skill times 2 to reapply the debuff mark before Roccia. Then full Forte heavy and reapply debuff again. Then skill basic 2-3 plus skill times 3 2 times before a second Forte heavy plus outro back into Shorekeeper. You basically just rush this and cast this as soon as you can with a full Forte bar. The cycle repeats, swapping after basic 1-2-3 so Roccia can Liberation plus skill again. Then we swap back to Danjin to prepare most of the Forte bar before going back to finish Shorekeeper's rotation. Remember to outro into Danjin so she can reapply the debuff and then outro into Roccia to finish her rotation before outroing back to Danjin once more. Now, the Verina version of this team functions very similarly, just with one less Quickswap. We open with Roccia ult this time with Tornado skill before swapping to Danjin to apply debuff with basic 1-2 plus skill times 2. Then we do one or more full skill basic 2-3 plus skill times 3 cycles, but stopping before we fully fill Concerto. Swap it to Verina basic 3-4-5 ult, then skill plus echo with 2 times aerial to outro into Danjin again. This lets us reapply the debuff with skill times 2, then outroing onto Roccia. She runs her typical skill plus fantasy for 3 times bounce before hair and outro back onto Danjin's main DPS phase. Liberation before the Forte heavy, then skill basic 2-3 plus skill times 3 2 times before a second Forte heavy as soon as possible in a full bar plus outro back onto Roccia. That's all you need. Reset rotation to Roccia intro and continue your skill plus bounces like before. Now the final set of teams represent alternative setups where we use Roccia or Zhezhi as main DPS carry. Alternative because these two units lack main DPS scaling and only have about 60 to 70% of the raw output of a typical main DPS character would have. However, I find they're very fun and can easily clear left and right tower even without signatured as 0. Zhezhi's team is surprisingly fast with a lot of potential for main DPS animation cancels, which makes it an extremely viable main DPS team if you like her enough to grab her sequences, whereas Roccia's carry is very satisfying spamming the AoE everywhere in Visual Fiesta. Both are actually really good main DPS options since their sources of damage are not tied to their ultimate cooldowns. The only thing holding them back is raw damage, of which sequences can fix for those that like these teams enough. The Zhezhi carry is probably my favorite because of the combination of beautiful aesthetics, fast mobility, and original sub-DPS whose biggest damage moveset isn't tied to ult or complicated rotations. She can hit anything, anywhere, at any moment. You simply fill up her Forte bar with a basic chain, then unload damage while teleporting everywhere. There's also a jump cancel tech you can do on every teleport, saving almost 2 full seconds per triple teleport. Because Zhezhi uses her triple teleport 2 times per rotation as a main DPS, the time saved from this cancel adds up very quickly across the fight. Roccia's grouping is a huge boon for Zhezhi's DPS against mobs because it allows her a kit, which consists almost entirely of cleave hitboxes, to hit everything at once. Verina will want 220 ER on this team alongside Shorekeeper with 250 in combat, both on 5-piece healer set. Roccia only needs 110 to 115 ER and Moonlit set as Midnight Veil cannot buff Zhezhi properly. Zhezhi is an excellent energy producer and only needs 100 ER, as sub-DPS have higher energy generation than a traditional main DPS, meaning if you use a sub-DPS as a main DPS, they can easily fill their entire ult meter. You can put her on the old Glacio set as she is mostly basic damage and doesn't scale well with the new Frosty Resolve set. Casting Lamp Illumin isn't even needed. Bajir can be used as a replacement for the healer slot if you don't have Shorekeeper or Verina. We open with Shorekeeper's basic 1-2-3, which we interrupt with Zhezhi's basic 1-2-3. The third move starts earlier than you'd think, and you can swap back to Shorekeeper to basic 1 plus heavy with Liberation cancel. Basic 1-2-3 again, skill cancel into echo, then basic 1 plus heavy into outro. Roccia enters with intro on basic 4. Liberation cancel, then skill into the air and bounce 3 times, hair and outro into Zhezhi. she will intro and immediately use Liberation. Skill plus basic to get 3 times Forte activations, then skill times 3. You can jump dodge with each skill teleport to speed up the sequence. If you float up in the air on the second teleport, you can dodge cancel to remove the cooldown to teleport again. Then, if you do 2 more basic chains and then skill plus basic to get 3 times Forte activations a second time, and skill times 3 with optional jump cancels again, before you outro back onto Shorekeeper to reset. She does basic 1, 2, 3, then swap in Zhezhi to basic 1, 2, 3, before swapping back basic 1 plus heavy with Liberation cancel, then basic 1, 2, 3, and skill and echo into outro. Roccia runs her normal rotation like on non-swap teams, and then Heron outro into Zhezhi to DPS more. It's a very straightforward and comfortable team. Verina team actually has a bit more quick swaps to favor the Roccia early intro when you finish Zhezhi's rotation. We open with Zhezhi basic 1, 2, 3 before swapping to Verina basic 3, 4, 5. Cancel with Liberation, then skill plus echo and aerial times 2 to outro into Roccia. The first rotation she does the normal moveset like non-swap with basic 4 plus Liberation, then skill plus 3 times bounce plus Heron into Zhezhi. After intro, we instantly cast Liberation, then skill plus basic to get 3 Forte activations. Then skill times 3 with jump cancels if you can to speed up the teleports. If you float in the air on second teleport, dodge to remove the third teleport cooldown. Do your basic attack chain twice to fill Forte again, and skill plus basic to activate the 3 Forte, then skill times 3 before outro back onto Roccia. We intro, and basic 4 with Liberation cancel, then skill Tornado. Don't cancel it, swap to Verina to basic 3, 4, 5, and then swap back to Roccia so you can bounce 3 times. Before the third hit lands, which would normally fill Roccia's outro bar, swap back to Zhezhi and slam down. Then swap to Verina and instantly cast Liberation, then skill plus echo, plus aerial times 2 and outro into Zhezhi. Poke an enemy once and then swap back to Roccia to poke the enemy again to be considered in combat, and then Heron outro back into Zhezhi. Skill plus basic to activate your already full Forte bar, then skill times 3 with jump cancels if you can to dump it. Reset with 2 full basic chains, then skill plus basic to reactivate your Forte bar again. Then skill times 3 with jump cancels to outro back onto Roccia once more. Now the last set of teams are Roccia main DPS. Her best buffer is Mortefi, and this team will play very similarly to GN setups, where our main bottleneck is charging Mortefi's Concerto ASAP so we can cycle onto our main DPS. Our main tool is remembering that Mortefi's normal skill allows us basic attacks to generate more Forte than normal for 5 seconds, which will be very useful in our Quickswap setup. Verina will want 220 ER on this team alongside Shorekeeper with 250 in combat, both on 5-piece sealer set. Roccia can get away even with 100 ER on these teams because she's such a good energy producer, and we're using her as main DPS here. She can use new or old Havoc sets with a choice between Nightmare Crownless, Dreamless, or Nightmare Heron. Please don't use normal Crownless on DPS Roccia as it's super clunky and the buffs aren't that good. Nightmare variants overall are slightly better since they buff on equip instead on cast. Mortefi will run with 130 to 144 ER on Moonlit or Empyrean set. Both work because Roccia doesn't deal as much damage as the main DPS, making Empyrean be better than normal, since it primarily focuses its buffs on the sub DPS in the team. Both teams will open with Mortefi's skill. Hold on to his Liberation because at S6 it grants 20% attack to team but for only 20 seconds. We instead use Roccia's Liberation since her buff lasts 30 seconds, then Tornado's skill and swap back to Mortefi. This will skip into basic 4, filling the rest of his Forte so we can cast enhanced skill. Swap back to Shorekeeper to finally do basic 1, 2, 3. Liberation cancel this, then basic 1 plus heavy, and swap back to Mortefi to do another basic 4. Squeeze in a Nightmare Crownless cast here on Roccia if you're using that one, otherwise back to Shorekeeper basic 1, 2, 3. Optionally, swap back to Mortefi to basic 4 again, but this is skippable if your previous quick swap was still buffed by his normal skill and filled 40% of his Forte bar. Then finally back to Shorekeeper basic 1 plus heavy. Skill plus echo and basic into outros. Mortefi intros, Liberation, and should be able to instantly cast enhanced skill from full Forte plus Heron, and then instantly outro into Roccia. Immediately skill into the air and dodge cancel if grouping isn't needed. Bounce 3 times and then reset her Forte bar with any combination of basic attacks and a heavy charge to get back in the air and bounce 3 more times. Cast an Nightmare Heron or Dreamless and outro to reset the team to Shorekeeper. Once again, we'll interrupt our basic 1, 2, 3 with Mortefi's skill to get enhanced Forte generation on basics. Go cast Roccia ult and skill Tornado and immediately come back to Mortefi to basic 4 plus enhanced Forte skill. Back to Shorekeeper to basic 1 plus heavy and cancel into Liberation, then basic 1, 2, 3 again, swapping to Mortefi to squeeze in one more basic 4. If you're fast enough, this should still produce extra Forte being buffed by the earlier normal skill cast. It only lasts for 5 seconds, so it'll take practice to do this consistently. Go back to Shorekeeper, basic 1 plus heavy, then skill plus echo to outro into Mortefi. Liberation, then if Forte is in full, basic once or twice, then enhance Forte skill, plus Heron into outro onto Roccia so she can DPS again. Once that's done, remember to outro into Shorekeeper. Now, the Verina team is extremely similar to the Shorekeeper variant. Because Verina's rotation is shorter than Shorekeeper, it is a lot easier to maintain Mortefi's Forte generation buff from his skill active for basic attacks, which is why you'll see slightly less swaps listed in this team, since it just shouldn't be needed. We open with Mortefi's skill like before, pull out Roccia and cast Liberation plus Tornado skill, and immediately swap back to Mortefi basic 4, plus enhance Forte skill. Then we manually swap to Verina 3-4-5 for a Forte stack as fast as we can, and immediately swap back to Mortefi again for basic 4 in hopes of it still being buffed for extra Forte generation. Squeeze in an extra Nightmare Crownless if you want before going back to Verina to cast Liberation, skill and echo, then aerial times 2 and outro into Mortefi. His Forte bar should be full. Cast Liberation, then enhance Forte skill, Heron and outro into Roccia to DPS. Immediately skill into air and dodge cancel if grouping isn't needed. Bounce 3 times and then reset her Forte bar with any combination of basic attacks, and a heavy charge to get back in the air and bounce 3 more times. Cast Nightmare Heron or Dreamless and outro to reset the team to Mortefi. Cast a skill here to fill Forte so you can cast enhance Forte skill before swapping to Roccia Liberation. Cast Tornado skill and immediately swap back to Mortefi to get that enhanced basic 4 to fill 40% of its Forte. Squeeze another Nightmare Crownless if you want here from Roccia. Then go back to Verina basic 3-4-5 with Liberation cancel. Skill plus echo and aerial times 2 to outro into Roccia's DPS phase. We go the big bounces twice before, well, resetting onto Mortefi again. And that's it for the Roccia team building guide. Thank you so much for watching through this entire video. I hope this has been useful for setting up and playing her teams. As a reminder, all spreadsheets documenting my testing can be found in the description and pinned comment. If you need a refresher on Roccia herself, do feel free to check out her complete guide down there too. Cheers! If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Stick around, you want to see interesting videos. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.